Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of Forbes Women. College affordability and childcare are two of the top issues in the 2024 presidential election. Sitting at the intersection of these issues is Nicole Lynn Lewis. She is the founder and CEO of Generation Hope, a nonprofit advocating for students in college who are also parents. Nicole, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start broadly with folks who haven't heard of Generation Hope. What is your organization and who does it serve?
So we're a nonprofit organization. We serve teen parents in college directly, and we advocate nationally for parenting students all over the country.
How many students in college are parents?
Well, it's interesting because I think most people, if you think about parenting students, think it's a small group of people, don't really think it's a significant population, but it actually is. We're talking about 1 in 4 college students across the country are parenting. And when we look at this through a race lens, it's about almost half of Black female undergraduates across the country are parenting while in college.
1 in 4 college students are also parenting. And give us your assessment. I think I know what you might say, but give us your assessment of how American society, American government is at serving this constituent group at this point in time.
Well, I think kind of building off of what I just said, this is an invisible population in that it has been historically underserved and disinvested in. And these are the students that are falling through the cracks in higher education, not because they don't have the cognitive ability, not because they don't have the drive and the ambition, but because our systems are not set up for them to be successful. And so we know that parenting college students have higher GPAs on average than non-parenting students, but they are not graduating at the same rate, really because our higher ed systems, our human service systems, all of the systems in this country are not designed to really invest in its population and their success. We have a lot of work to do when it comes to addressing those disparities, addressing those long-standing historic gaps in the way that we stand up for families, particularly marginalized families in this country.
You said we have a lot of work to do, and I think the work comes across a lot of areas. I want to start with what your organization does. How do you and Generation Hope specifically help students who are also parents? What are the services or support that you provide?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that I started the organization because I've lived the mission. I was a teen mom. I got pregnant my senior year of high school. And when I got pregnant, people told me your life is over. You're not going to be successful and you're not going to go to college. And I thought now more than ever, it was so critical for me to get that college degree to take care of this little one. And so I started at William & Mary, and I always tell people I stepped foot on that campus and thought, these feet don't belong here. You know, I'm in a place where other students have a ton of support. They're not parenting, and they don't look like me. I was one of very few Black students at William & Mary. And in 4 years, I graduated. My daughter walked across the graduation stage with me. And it really was this moment, you know, where you achieve something that people tell you is impossible. But I also realized that I could do something to make it not this difficult for other parenting students or other mothers and fathers who wanted to go to college, particularly young parents. And so that's why I started Generation Hope, my own experience. So our programming really comes from that lived experience, comes from that authenticity and that place of knowing what it's like to be parenting, to have very few resources, and to want to improve your life and your children's lives, but not having the supports and the systems to get there. So we are a holistic program. We really wrap parenting students with all of the supports that they need to get through college. So much of what happens outside of the classroom when it comes to the barriers that parenting students face: housing insecurity, food insecurity, transportation insecurity, domestic violence is a huge issue for this population. And so really looking at how do we infuse those supports, both emotional and financial, back into the lives of these students. We provide emergency funding, tuition assistance. We have a robust mentoring program. We also provide mental health services for free on staff, career readiness programming. We do early childhood programming as well to make sure their little ones are successful. And then we have an arm of our work that is not just addressing the direct needs of families, one-to-one boots on the ground, but also looking at the systemic change that needs to happen across various systems, particularly higher education, to make sure that millions of mothers and fathers are able to get their college degrees, not just the scholars in our program. And we do that through policy work, research and reports, and also really working closely with college partners to transform their campuses.
When you talk about systemic change, my mind goes immediately to the 2024 presidential election. So, Nicole, can you break down what we're seeing out of each campaign, both Vice President Harris and former President Trump? Does either candidate have a set of policies that specifically serves student parents and this constituency?
Well, we're definitely looking at the Harris-Walz campaign, and we're really excited by some of the things that we've already seen Vice President Harris be a champion of during her time in the Biden-Harris administration, looking at her championing childcare affordability, for example, free college, student loan forgiveness. Those are things that are critical for the student parent population. We know that student parents are more likely to be low income, so they are more likely to take out student loans. At the center of the student loan crisis in this country are student parents, particularly Black mothers. They have the highest amounts of student loan debt of any other student. And so, efforts that we've seen coming out of the Biden-Harris administration, we're hoping that those continue in a Biden-Walz ticket and administration. We also have seen Governor Walz champion initiatives that benefit student parents in the state of Minnesota, really looking at grant programs for colleges across the state to invest in programming that's tailored to this population, that helps colleges and universities specifically support them in getting their post-secondary credential. And childcare affordability. We know that student parents are shouldering, like so many parents across the country, just incredible costs around childcare for their children. And if you can't get childcare, you can't go to class. We talk about childcare so much as it relates to workforce. But there's also a big piece of this where if you're a mother or father, you want to get a post-secondary credential, you're not going to be able to do that if you can't get affordable and quality childcare for your children. So those are some things that we've already seen both Vice President Harris and Governor Walz championing, and we're really excited about the prospect of that continuing. In the Trump administration, we definitely saw some things that were both working against student parents, but also some things that were beneficial. For example, a federal grant program called C Campus, which provides colleges and universities with funding to be able to stand up childcare solutions either on their campus or nearby their campus. That funding was increased under the Trump administration, so that was definitely a good thing. A lot of more work to do there, but definitely a good thing. But we're also seeing things that are troubling as we're talking about what could come from a Trump administration, which is dismantling the Department of Education. The Department of Education provides such critical programming and support to millions of college students across the country, particularly marginalized students and particularly student parents. The C Campus program is a great example of a program coming out of the Department of Education that is critical for this population.
Fascinating. So it's almost, is he contradicting himself? Because if under his administration, the funding for that program increased, but yet his campaign promises in 2024 feel a little bit different. Would you agree?
Well, I think there's many contradictions, right? I mean, we've seen at the same time that we saw that funding increase, we also have seen attacks on DEI programming. This population is disproportionately students of color. And so when we're talking about getting rid of or dismantling equity programs at colleges and universities or at federal agencies, I mean, that's an example of an initiative or a policy that is really working against what we're trying to create. We want more equity in our systems, particularly in higher education. There's no doubt that we have significant gaps and disparities across the board in higher education. So while there have been gains, there certainly have been things that have worked against what we're trying to make sure is happening for this population.
And let's look briefly at the running mates on both of these tickets. We saw this week J.D. Vance, former President Trump's running mate, make some comments about postmenopausal women and their role in society and towards childcare. I don't know if you saw those comments, Nicole, but what's your sense of how well this ticket understands on the Republican side the issues of student parents?
Here's what I will say that I believe deeply is, and I kind of touched on this earlier, that the authenticity and the lived experience and the proximity to the populations that are most impacted is so critical and so important. And I say that because as we're looking at the prospect of having a Black woman leading this country for the first time in U.S. history, that is exciting. That is an opportunity and a moment for us to have authentic leadership, to have someone who is proximate to the people who are most impacted by these issues. And that is exciting for this country. Our hope, and my hope, is that this country puts its trust in a Black woman and in her leadership to be able to really get us to a place where we're authentically serving those who are most impacted by the issues that we face: housing insecurity, food insecurity, women's health issues, childcare, all of those things. This is an opportunity for us to have that in the White House at the helm for the first time, and that's exciting.
And of course, Governor Walz was a high school teacher. You mentioned the Minnesota Assistance for Student Parents. Can you talk a little bit more about his role in getting that forward? And also, I don't know, were there copycat states? Was there a follow-on effect from anything that he did in Minnesota?
Well, I think you touched on it. You know, someone who has been in the classroom, who has been an educator, who has worked so closely with young people, and who has had a history of race and gender protections. That is exciting. That is a good thing for student parents. As I mentioned, this population is disproportionately students of color, disproportionately low income. They are feeling so many of the barriers that have historically been put in place when it comes to their ability to get through high school and to college. And so to have somebody who has worked so closely with young people is really wonderful, and who has a real concern for, marginalized populations. The work that Governor Walz has done around student parents has been really important. It has set a precedent. We're seeing other states also doing this work. We have seen states passing legislation that requires colleges and universities to collect the parenting status of their students for the first time. So whenever there are initiatives that a governor stands up in his state, his or her state or their state, it does create a domino effect. People are looking to that to see what do they need to do in their own state. But we've seen just a real deep concern for students that have been allowed to fall through the cracks, even free lunch programs. Governor Walz has been a big proponent of that in the state of Minnesota. And so those kinds of initiatives matter. Those kinds of initiatives are important when it comes to families and their economic mobility, and particularly mothers and fathers who want to go to college.
Interesting. I don't always report on higher ed. So can you just clarify for us all? You said something about tracking the number of student parents. Does not every college in the U.S. ask that question and know that about their student body?
Correct. So when I first started Generation Hope, I thought, well, I'll just go around to the various colleges and I'll ask, how many parenting students do you have? And they didn't know. And that's because most colleges in this country do not track the parenting status of their students. They don't have any idea how many of their students are parenting, what their needs are, what their experiences are. And it's so important. We've seen, for example, over the past few years, more attention going to food insecurity for college students. We've seen headlines and news about the fact that there are so many college students that are food insecure. One thing that I always like to talk to people about is, isn't it important to know that not only that student is food insecure, but that they have two other mouths to feed? And that is data right now that most colleges and universities just don't have. So some of the work that we do at Generation Hope is helping institutions stand up data collection systems to be able to track that status, to be able to know at any given time how many of your students are parenting. And we've worked with colleges that once they stand up that data, find out 30% of their college students are parenting. And it's important to know that in terms of how do we make sure those students get to the graduation stage, given that they have so many hurdles before them as parenting students.
And when you cite these numbers, it seems like such a significant portion of the population. And I don't know if you've done this analysis, but what's the economic potential that we as a country have in better supporting this constituent group? Is there a higher GDP associated if more of these students end up graduating? Or can you maybe paint the picture for us of the future that could be if there was more support?
Absolutely. So the Institute for Women's Policy Research has done a lot of work around this and looking state by state to see if a single mother, for example, were to get her a bachelor's degree, her associate's degree, how much money would come back into that state, right? Through income tax, through all the other things that we know that income can bring in. And it doesn't even begin to touch on, it's very much about dollars, but it doesn't even begin to touch on the fact that many of these students go on to become public school teachers, computer engineers. We have alums here at Generation Hope that are doing incredible things. They're working for the government. They're nonprofit professionals. They're nurses. They're giving back in these incredible ways that we all benefit from, right? So it's not only that there is a significant return in income tax, it's saving us money on public benefits that have to go out, but it's also really investing back into our communities, our schools, our organizations, into our own families, our own lives, and helping our communities get better. This is untapped talent. This is amazing potential. We have students in our program who are perfect 4.0 students, and they might have 2 or 3 children. And I think the perception is that they don't want to get a college degree, that they don't have the cognitive abilities, and our students fly in the face of those stereotypes. So it is beneficial for our entire country to be investing in mothers and fathers who want to get their college degrees, particularly those who have been really marginalized and kept at the fringes.
Over the course of this conversation, Nicole, you've mentioned so many other issues that this group is facing, right? There's not just the college affordability, which gets the majority of the air in any room. There's food insecurity. You mentioned domestic violence, obviously childcare services, so people can then go to class and study. Is there legislation that your organization is pushing for that is either comprehensive that addresses all of this, or is it a piece-by-piece strategy that you're pursuing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish there was a magic wand piece of legislation that would solve for everything. I think, as you said, our work touches almost every issue that this country is facing. The families that we work with are, unfortunately, they are at the intersection of so many of these issues and these challenges. For COVID-19, for example, we really were helping people to understand that this population was in crisis well before COVID-19. But then when COVID-19 hit, they were literally at the epicenter of it. They were more likely to be those hourly workers or essential workers. They were more likely to be without childcare, more likely to be experiencing mental health stressors. So, this is a population that sits at the epicenter of so many of the issues that we care about. What we are doing is we're looking at opportunities to create margin for these families. So, for example, college affordability is really important. If I'm a mother or father and I want to go to college, the first thing I think about is not being able to afford it. And so we know that 1 in 4 college students across the country is currently enrolled and is parenting, but that doesn't include how many millions more mothers and fathers would go to college if they felt like they could afford it. So we're looking at free college proposals. We're looking at doubling the Pell Grant, which is really, funding that helps students be able to afford college, particularly, low income students. We're looking at housing solutions. We're looking at childcare. How can we create margin, especially financially, for these students to be successful? But there's also another side of that, which is that if we create that margin and we make college more affordable, we have to have institutions that know how to support this population. If they get into an institution, but they're in an environment that doesn't see them as parents, that doesn't understand not only the challenges that they face, but the assets that they bring to the classroom, it's not likely that those students are going to be successful at those institutions. So we're also really looking at capacity building grants that go to institutions, particularly underfunded institutions, community colleges, HBCUs, MSIs, to be able to give them the training and the support and the capacity to really transform their institutions to be more family inclusive. A great example is many colleges across the country, not only do they not track that data on parenting students, but they have a policy called No Kids on Campus. And that means, if I'm a parent and I need to get extra help from a professor for a midterm the next day, and my childcare fell through, I'm not going to get that extra help, and I may fail that midterm, right? So how do we help colleges understand that they can still meet students' needs, but be family inclusive environments? And so that work has to go hand in hand.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of how much discussion there has been in the public sphere around student debt forgiveness. Does that do anything for this population, or does it entirely miss the mark on their needs?
It does do something for this population because we know, as I said earlier, that at the epicenter of this crisis are student parents, particularly Black mothers. And many of those mothers, because those supports aren't in place and because college affordability has not been a priority, they're leaving institutions without a credential that can help them to actually get better paying jobs and family sustaining jobs, which means that you have this incredible amount of debt. You don't have a credential to show for it. You can't get into a higher paying job. And so it's really setting you back even further in terms of your ability to care for your family and to build wealth, right? And so relief programs are critical for this population because we have to create some relief and we have to help these students or former students be able to shoulder and move forward from that debt, but also to get them back, to re-engage them in institutions that will allow them to get a credential that will get them into those family sustaining careers. So it is crucial for this population. We know who's at the center of the student debt crisis. It's not being talked about enough, but if we do have relief programs, it really frees those mothers and fathers up to be able to provide for their families and also to possibly go back to college to get a credential and to get into that good career that is going to put food on the table.
We've talked about so much work here, the systemic work, the work that you're doing both to support student parents and to do research on this segment of the population in the United States. What else is going on in your corner of the world? Are you doing voter engagement? What's next for you over the next few months?
Yeah, I mean, it's a busy few months. So we're championing bills at the state and the federal level, looking at legislative opportunities that are going to remove barriers for parenting students, but also for families nationwide, particularly marginalized families. And we are looking, we're watching the legislation that's coming out, but also we're watching this campaign. We're looking to see what will happen. We are enthusiastic and excited about what could happen in November. And, for us, a big piece of our work is making sure that this population is on people's radar. It's not talked about enough. When I got pregnant and I talked about going to college, people said, you can't go to college. That's just not in your future now. And I think broadly that's happening where people don't believe that mothers and fathers can actually get a college degree. We know that's not true. We know that they have all of the potential in the world. And what we need to do is create the environment and the conditions that set them up for success. So for us, a lot of this work is about making sure that the student parent population is on people's radar, that it's prioritized, that higher education is accessible to all people, especially mothers and fathers, because we know the generational impacts of a parent getting their degree. And so that's where you'll see us really busy, is getting the word out, talking to people about the student parent population, building that awareness so that when we are talking about childcare affordability, it's not just about workforce, it's also about parents getting their education.
Nicole Lynn Lewis, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your work and your perspective. We so appreciate your time and insight.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be on with you.